Yeah. I'll react if I had to. Put some things in the past too, and don't let them distract you, but react if you have to. Yeah. I'll react if I had to. Put some things in the past too, and don't let them distract you, but react if you have to. Yeah. React if you have to. Yeah.
Don't know the time, yeah. Just know that I'm, one of a kind, What's on your mind, What hard to find, Beautiful mind, Still in my prime, Just know that I'm here.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Pondoff's Anonymous, episode 16, I think.
16.
And Jeff, I think it's Saturday that we're recording this, right? I don't know.
I think it is. I'm not sure. I'm losing track.
All right. Somebody said it was March 97th. We'll go with that. Today's special, man. We have the guest of guests that joined us, and I've been wanting to not have him yet, actually. I've been wanting to wait for a special day or especially do it in person. But often we say there's no better time than now, and considering the circumstances, and I believe that we're entering the beginning of Holy Week. I'll let him correct me if I'm wrong, which he often does. I'd like to welcome the lead pastor from the gathering in St. Louis, my pastor, Jeff's boss, and kind of my boss because he's in contact with my mother often on my behavioral issues, Matt Miofsky. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris, for having me on. It's good to be here. I listen. You know how much I appreciate you and love you before you were sober, and now after you're sober even more. And so for me to be on here is great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I appreciate that, and I know, and ditto, man. It's a crazy time we're living in, where we're doing churches online and not being able to do this in person, and we've been kind of tackling that issue from the mental health aspect and the addiction and recovery aspect. And I know you've had to pivot your whole church model.
Hey, wait, before we talk about that, can I ask you something? I'm going to turn it around. So I listen to your podcast. I love it, by the way. I can see why more and more people are listening to it, and they should. And I've noticed, you curse a lot on here, like a lot. Yeah. And, I've never really said anything about it. I've never told you to not be yourself, right? I mean, we can attest to that. And you and I grew up around a lot of the same elements, so I always loved that about you. But I have a favor to ask today. Just don't pretend to, don't never curse, because then people will think you're not being yourself.
Okay.
So, but curse thoughtfully today, and not gratuitously. So, be thoughtful about it. Make them count when you want them, when you want to make a difference, but don't just be gratuitous about it. And that might go for the rest of the podcast too. Just, I'm just asking you as your pastor.
Oh, man.
While I'm on here, just be thoughtful about the cursing, okay?
You keep looking out your window. Is my mother out there telling you to say this stuff?
Tell me. It's lovely out there. No, that's it. No, I've never, I'm only half kidding.
Well,
you can be yourself around. You can be yourself around me, right?
Yeah, I know. I bet. I'm sure you have a bunch of text messages from Vicky Hinkle and my mother telling.
No, this has always been our relationship. I say, be who you are and continue to be more thoughtful about who you are. So,
yeah, I remember that. I'll take that in mind. Thanks. I just remember last year around this time, you put me on stage at Easter Sunday in front of 3,000 people. Well, now you're on my show, all right? This is it's my turn.
All right. I'll turn it back over to you.
Just on that note, I do often hear in my household from my wife and next door, my mother, that what would Matt do in this situation. I get that quite often. I remember when I went to the University of Illinois, and probably 2 years ago, they were really hitting the taking the chief away. I mean, the chief was gone, but really like going towards the what is it called, mascotting of the American Indian, and they took away our fight song, and that was my final straw, and I was huffing and puffing and pounding my chest. And before I went on a Facebook tirade, because I was really intentional about not doing that, I text Matt, and you talked me off the ledge, Matt. You said, I understand some things can make you angry, but really, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. And what's the point of being angry about something that you can't? So I'm telling you, he's my no guy. Everybody needs a no guy. I really firmly believe that. Athletes are probably the first one to come to mind, like that need a no guy on social media, right? I strongly believe in that. So yes, I wanted to share. That's one story of many where Matt has talked me off a ledge. But Matt, so today I really want to talk about a couple things. I have an audience. I don't mean to sound gloated. No, I mean everybody has an audience, whether it's even just one person that listens to this. So we have a couple, and they don't go to most of them don't. There are some listeners from the gathering, but not. I would say the majority of the audience that I'm speaking to or trying to help are not necessarily St. Louis. They might be on the Illinois side of the river, or even people. I know we have some colleagues in Florida that are listening and spreading the message. Definitely have a good friend in New Jersey who's told people to listen to the podcast in the recovery world. But most of the people I'm talking to have a lot of myths about church and what church is and who Jesus is and the power in that. And today I would like to talk about those, direct to them. And I know this is Holy Week, right?
It is. Yeah, tomorrow begins officially Holy Week with Palm Sunday.
Okay, see, I got that one right.
Yeah, you did.
If you're taking notes. And I want to talk about one thing that I remember first learning when I went to the gathering is we have the 5 core values, and one of them I do want to stress. I want to talk about once, if you can name them, is giving's a part of that. And one of the biggest problems I have, like when people, it's more of a satire joke. They're like, oh, how much money they getting you for? They kind of like use it as a joke.
Yeah.
But and then an excuse to not trust a church. And as much as I tell them that's bullshit, that they are having that myth that yes, we do. Giving's a big practice at the gathering, right? And what people do with the money, it's for some reason hard for people to connect the dots. They think they're just giving money, and that my cousin from Staten Island put it brilliantly. He goes, I really like that pastor guy that leads your church because he's not driving around in a Rolls Royce.
Yeah, I haven't gotten my Rolls Royce yet. No, I have a. You can attest, Chris, that I have a pretty modest vehicle.
I would say it's the exact opposite of a Rolls Royce. So can you? I want to hear a little bit before we kind of talk about. Excuse me, my story, and it's not a self-promotion, but it's the one I know and how powerful it was, how my life was transformed because of friends and pastor like you and Jesus and all that stuff. Can you get into a little bit on how your background, and use as much time as you want to describe it, but going from being a football player to answering what we've said on this show is kind of a calling.
Sure. Well, I grew up because I'm on your show. I gotta tell people I like the mug. I grew up
gathering.
I grew up half my life in a little steel town called Granite City, Illinois, which some of your listeners will know exactly where that is. It was already
They're judging you.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's where my family's from. It was getting pretty rough by the time I was a kid, which I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean, you know what it's like. And I grew up there. And then when I was 9, we moved out into the country, and I went to high school in Washington, Missouri. So I usually say I'm from there. So I had kind of, I grew up around middle class factory folk in Granite City. My dad worked at the steel mill, got transferred to a steel mill out in the middle of Missouri, and then I grew up in a rural area basically. And so, my whole high school was focused on football and girls and hanging out with my friends. Not that different from a lot of people. I went to college and I played football. I went to Washington University in St. Louis. I was fortunate to be able to go there. Studied math, so religion really wasn't on the radar screen. But there was a couple things that I'll name. I mean, one is I started leading a Bible study, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, when I was in college, and at the time I kind of hid my faith. I mean, faith was meaningful to me mostly because I was intrigued by. I figured there had to be something more to life than just what we see, and that idea always resonated with me. And the more that I explored God, the more that began to make sense, not just make sense to me, but make sense out of a lot of what I saw. And so what happened is guys on the football team, when I was leading this Bible study, started talking to me about like what they were going through. And this was huge because, not to be stereotyping, but guys on the football team typically didn't sit around and share with each other. It's just not the way we related, This is not what we did. And so when one of them began to do that, I realized that underneath, like if you could peel back the curtain, so to speak, in all of our lives, even these like, sort of tough football guys, they had a lot of, I'll curse along with you, they had a lot of shit going on in their life. And they were trying to wrestle with that largely all by themselves and really without any outside wisdom. And it led them down a lot of wrong tracks because they didn't know where else to turn. And so I began to talk to some guys and invite them to come to this study because I really thought that what Jesus had to say was really relevant to the kind of stuff that we're going through. And basically, I mean, the story of why I went into ministry was I didn't really want any of the jobs. I mean, I wasn't ready to work yet. I didn't really want to go work in some investment company or computer programming or all the things that people wanted to hire math majors for. And I began to see that there's a lot of people in the world that have been turned off by church. And by the way, I'd say rightly so. The church has done a pretty bad job oftentimes at removing all the barriers and just connecting people to what I think is most important about what we have, which is, Jesus and who Jesus is and what Jesus has to say about the lives that we're trying to live. And instead we've erected all sorts of barriers and hoops and to jump through, and we've collected a lot of baggage. And so people rightly, I think, are skeptical of church. I don't actually argue with that. But I began to sense that most people, it wasn't just football players, if you could peel back the curtain on the surface, they might look like they're fine. They might be holding it together. They might even be successful in some outward way with money or friends or whatever. But if you could peel back the curtain, so many people were struggling with stuff inside. And I think that the problem is we struggle with that stuff all by ourselves and without any outside wisdom. And it leads us down some wrong roads. And I think, addiction, as you talk so often, is one way in which we try to deal with, I think, all that crap that's going on under the surface, and we don't know what to do with it. So some people maybe turn to sex or women or money or overworking, or some turn to drugs, alcohol, gambling. I mean, it's all sorts of things, but I think all those are symptoms of spiritual wrestling that we don't know what to do with underneath the surface.
Sure. It's funny that I'm thinking of one friend in particular who is so it's got I would call him maybe he's a genius, he's a smart guy and mathematician. Like if he can't see that 2 + 2 = 4, then he has trouble believing in it, and I think that's his problem with being a believer or a church guy or just buying into Jesus, because he's you are a brilliant mathematician. I mean, we've talked about it, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. Remember that come tithing time that I complimented you, and I'm drinking out of the Gathering coffee mug. But I am a little behind on my tithing, aren't I?
The promotional placement doesn't replace tithing. That's in addition to tithing.
Oh. All right, we'll get to that.
This isn't a multiple choice spirituality.
Hey, Jeff, if this starts getting too hot on my side, we're going to need you to hit the dump button on Matt. Okay?
Yeah, right.
Hey, but no, you're a math guy. You got to have an equation. It's got to equal something, and you got to see it and prove it, right? In theories, and then also to be transformed, if you will, by Jesus. That is, there's so many people that have that only think of it one way. Think of life as a scientific equation where their brain is trying to wrestle around the idea of Jesus and his resurrection, and we'll get to that. But that's a barrier. And what I've loved, we've done some sermon series, even you have, on you don't ask people to check their intelligence at the door, is a quote you used one time. In fact, I think you were going to do a whole sermon not on it, but basically the name was, and it could have been a play on words, like, do we believe in dinosaurs? And it happened, I remember, right when the whole Ferguson stuff went haywire, so we had to pivot, which we often do at our church when there's pressing social issues or anything that's going on that impacts us outside the church. We're going to pivot and address those. So we didn't get to that sermon, but I have a lot of friends and some of the people in this audience that can't find God until they're at rock bottom and they have nothing else, and then they cling to him because they have trouble with that equation. What do you have to say to those friends and people that are listening?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First, I don't think it's bad to wrestle with this stuff. And I think one of the mistakes the church has made is making people feel like it's wrong to have doubts or to be skeptical or to have hard questions. And instead of answering hard questions, or at least trying to talk about hard questions, the church has oftentimes shut that stuff down, which I think just feeds this sense that the church is basically BS and they don't really want to wrestle with things that I'm thinking about. And so I'd just say, first of all, it's not bad. This is how you actually arrive at faith, I think, is wrestling with it. Second thing I'd say to those really scientific thinkers, that's the way I think as well. And, being a math major, as you said, and studying math and loving it, there's a logic to it all. And you want things to add up, right? You want it to make sense. But I would also just point out that there's so much mystery even in something like math or science, right? When we get to the limits of that stuff, there's a lot of mystery there that we can't quite add up. I mean, math has a whole category of math that deals with irrational numbers. I mean, the definition is numbers that don't make any sense. I often point out to math people, there's as many numbers between 0 and 1 as there are between 0 and a million. Now, that's a mind bender a little bit. That doesn't quite make sense. That doesn't add up, right? That there's the same. I think that at the limits of math is that little, infinity sign, which we don't quite know what to do sometimes with that. So, and I think the same is true of physics. The same is true of biology. I mean, there's at the edge of all this kind of a sense that there's more beyond this, but we can't quite get there through reason. So I actually appreciate reason, and I think there's more to the world than what we can see, touch, measure, and prove. And then I think lastly, one of the things that I would say to people is I was converted to faith over time, and it wasn't through mental gymnastics or a proof in my head. But the way that faith converted me, the way that Jesus showed up to me, was I hung around it enough to see the real impact Jesus had on people's lives. And you're an example of that. And I always tell you, not to blow smoke to you, but you've always been an inspiration to me as a pastor, because I look at you and I see a guy whose life looks so different that there has to be a God. I mean, this is not to be mean, but I knew you when you were not sober.
Right.
I loved you then, and you came to church every once in a while, sat in the balcony, and
God, you would make eye contact with me up there. I remember that. You would look at me, and I knew I could read your bubble.
If anybody would have said back then, hey, that guy, is going to get sober, become not just the leader in his church, but start impacting other guys that he used to sit next to on the bar stool and drink with or fight with or whatever, that he would speak hope and encouragement into the lives of thousands of people through a podcast, people would have said, I was nuts. I mean, people who knew you thought you'd be dead in 18 months, if that.
Yeah.
And so I think that to watch the transformation happen, and I've gotten to see that, over and over and over again, there's something real about faith. And I would just say to people, you don't have to be converted all at once, but sometimes it's just hanging around it and watching it. And you can be skeptical even. But try a church, a healthy one, not a weird, dysfunctional one, but a healthy one. Try a church, try faith. I mean, Jesus invited people to just follow him for a while, not to believe everything all at once, but just follow and just see what happens. I mean, come and see was one of his invitations. So that's always my invitation to skeptical people, is just come and see, and see for yourself if you don't believe there's something here that's true. And so I think if people do that, if they give it a chance, then they begin to maybe wonder if maybe there's more to the world and to their life than what they first thought. And I would just add really quickly before I stop talking, we have faith in all sorts of things if we really pay attention to it. I mean, we believe in all sorts of things that aren't rational, that don't add up. I mean, drugs and alcohol being one of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And overworking being one of them. The thought that more money means more happiness being one of them. These things have been proven over and over and over again to not lead to happiness or joy, and yet we do them. Why? There's all sorts of things that we do that don't add up. And so I think if we take that same kind of faith that we have sometimes in money or sex or drugs or alcohol and try putting it in something else, it actually leads us to a better place.
I mean, I thank you, because I don't articulate it well enough to my friends, my people that are listening, and I always worry that they feel I'm trying to sell it. And I thought about this and the Jesus stuff on my end, like when we had a girl named Megan on who talked about her like brutal alcoholism. I don't think there's another way to say it. And she's now 2 years sober. And she came on with Jeff and I, and the way she says she promotes her sobriety, and she's a believer, and she's given it over to God, because at some point when you're at rock bottom, you just can't do it on your own. But she said it's attraction rather than promotion. And I thought, when she said that, and we happened to be recording at your church, it clicked with me, because that's, I don't want to go out and door knock and sell it, but with my friends in everyday conversation, they know what's got me here. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people that I work with confidentially, or and that try to be anonymous about it, but the people that reach out and need help, I tell them, well, there's not a master's degree from WashU, psychotherapist, or any of this stuff, but I've walked your walk, and this is what got me. This is what helped me. So if you want to keep trying it your way, that's fine. But if you give my way a chance, I think you increase your chances to succeed. And so I finally tell him, I go, and I'm not hiding it. God, the grace of God got me sober. I tell people often when I checked into rehab, I had a screaming match with Jesus. I say I lost, but I think I won in the he helped me win in the long run, because it was then when I said I'm done. And I always knew I had a home at your church, because I was always a attracted to your church. I would go. I loved your message, but more importantly, I loved the way you were greeted at the door and how all are welcome at your church, no matter what, and that's, I get so in line with how Jesus preached in his, how many ever years ago. So I felt at home. You and I instantly kind of bonded, and then through the death of my father, and then 6 months after that, when Ollie died, we spent a lot of time together in that PICU, and I was like, this is a guy that walks the walk. And I'm not going to trash other churches. You probably don't want me to do that, even though it's very tempting. But there's some churches out there that treat this Jesus thing like it's an exclusive treehouse, and you got to check off some boxes, and it pisses me off more colorfully than it, like, because you know what I mean? It fires me up, and I know it fires you up. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think, to your earlier point about promotion, I always put it this way. Like, for me, Jesus has changed my life. I've seen Jesus change the lives of a lot of people. And so for me, it's just a kind of a constant, persistent invitation. People in my life always know they have an invitation. And from time to time, I just voice it. Hey, if you want to try this out with me, just come and see. I'm not asking you to believe anything, give up anything, do anything. Just come and see. And I think that as Christians, we shouldn't be silent about our faith, and we shouldn't push it on other people, but it should just be like an open seat at our dinner table. Hey, if you just need a place to come, if you want a place to sit down, if you need a place to belong and just to be welcomed, just come. And the invitation is there. And every once in a while, we should voice it. And so that's how I always see faith, is a persistent invitation.
Yeah.
And I've, and to your story, right? I invited you a lot, early
Yes, you
on.
did. That's what I was thinking.
And you came every once in a while, and I invited you in the wake of your father's death to consider a couple options in your life, and you kind of chose one, and I invited you as you were choosing that to, hey, when you're ready, or if you're ever ready to try something different. And then when you decided to get sober, I invited you. And so it was there was a persistence there to the invitation, but I think always done in love, never done with pressure or promotion. And it took a while. It took a few years in your case, but you decided to give it a try at some point. And I think there are people out there that have been turned off in the past to the kind of churches you're talking about. And those are real, man. So many people, I often say the worst enemy of the church is the church. My biggest obstacle to doing what I do is people's past bad experiences of church. I got to undo a lot of that, a lot of the damage and dysfunction of churches that, hey, you're welcome, not really.
Right.
Or, hey, come on in. Well, now here comes the judgment. Or, hey, as long as your life's squeaky clean, you're welcome here. But as soon as you screw up, then we're all going to, do one of these, and you need to go until you get it right. So I get I really do. I understand all that. And there are churches that do that kind of stuff. But that's not Jesus. That's us screwing up what Jesus wants us to do, I think.
And that's not the gathering. You're, I always say, if you let me in, you'll let anybody in.
That's true. We do, right? I mean, I always say to people, I really don't, it's not, hey, people who come in our church, we have people who come that have lived great lives and have lived messy lives, messier than yours. We have people who come who think they have it all figured out, don't know what they're doing at all. We have people who went to bed on time last night and people who stayed up all night, not only Saturday night, but Friday night and Thursday night. We have people, all sorts of people, skeptical and believers, and I want them all to come. I think that's what makes the church the church. And when I preach, I don't try to preach at people. I try to invite them to see in Jesus something that I think could be powerful and relevant to the stuff that we wrestle with under the surface. And this is just one more place to maybe find what we're looking for. And I think for a lot of people, when they give it a chance, it actually, they find that it changes their life.
I mean, it's completely transformed my life. And it's so parallel to the Easter story. In fact, even the season when I decided to get sober. You referenced something you sent me after my father died, and I actually have it pulled up, and I was going to read what you wrote, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
As long as it's to you, so it's yours to share.
Yeah. Can you guys still see me? You know, I don't get the Zoom technology stuff. I'm always 4 years behind on technology, but I've got this pulled up. Can you guys still see my beautiful face?
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Looks great.
So on May 13th, my father passed away on May 12th of 2012, and I've often shared on the podcast, it was my end of my world. The sun went out. I had placed all my eggs in his basket, and that it was all over for me. In fact, there were many people that said when Tom died, it's only a matter of time. He is not going to be able to survive this. I was on that list of thinking, no way, and in fact, tried to drink myself to death, literally. So I just didn't really care to wake up. I wanted to be in heaven with Tom, which I was certain that he was going there. I was certain he had some explaining to do, sure, or however that goes, but I think he would maybe grease his way in a little bit, but I was hoping he was there anyway. Matt, you sent me a note on May 13th, and then I replied back to you, not sure why God puts this much hurt in someone's heart. I sure hope he'll give me the strength to get through today, which was the funeral day. On the 17th, I replied. And I said Psalm 23, I guess that's probably the only scripture I knew at the time. And Matt, you replied to me, and I still have the letter. I keep it with me. I've talked about it to Ashley, my wife, and my mom's aware of it, and some other people. But and I kept it with me because I was just beginning my descend to even a deeper rock bottom. As you wrote this, and what you wrote, I'm going to read right now. It said, "I'm sorry, Chris, you will get through today. I do not want to write a bunch of platitudes to you, as I know that will ultimately not be helpful. I'll just say that the darkest moment is not the final moment. There will be a next chapter for you and for your dad." Then you left me with 2 Psalms. I'm not going to read the whole Psalms, I think, but I will read, and then after you posted it, I'll tell you what Psalms they are. Psalm 30 and Psalm 40. So I recommend you guys checking those out. But then you closed with this. You said, "I'll go out on a limb and offer one thing that I have seen a lot when this happens, and from personal experience. This will be a defining moment for you. It can change you in a powerful, positive way that you will look back on proudly and that would make your dad proud. Or it can be an excuse to fuck up the next 10 years or more of your life in anger and grief. The enemy will pull you toward the second, God toward the first. Don't choose the second. If you ever want to talk about this, you know I'm always here. I hope this doesn't come off as a lecture from a pastor, just some thoughts from a friend who has been in the pit. Matt." Sorry, it's hard to read sometimes because it takes me back to those days, and but I hang on to them, and I'm so grateful for your words, and I sure did try the second, right? I think it was 22 months until I checked into rehab, and you and I have talked about that, and I just recently, because I checked into rehab, it was March 25th. So Easter season, it's right in the middle of it. For those of you, it's between Mardi Gras and Easter, okay? Ash Wednesday is the Wednesday after Mardi Gras. And then, Easter Sunday. So those 40 days? 46, 47? Yeah. Hey.
You got it.
Look at this. Another check mark down there, okay? That's the season. So when I checked in and I got out, it was right around Easter, and I remember I volunteered to help parking team on that first Easter out of rehab. But just recently I got a Facebook memory from 2013 when I was deep in it, and it was me from your balcony at the McCausland site, and I took a picture, and I was like, my caption of the picture was like, "Preach, I'm hungover, but I'm here. Preach on, Matt," or something. And those were the days that Matt would look at and glare at me up in the balcony in a good way, like, "I'm here. I got your back. We need to get to work soon." Like, that's kind of the message that I received from you. And then so that first Easter out sober, I volunteered, worked the parking lot, and immediately you introduced me to another pastor at our church, Matt Fulmer, who had me join his small group on Tuesday nights, which became my surrogate AA meeting group with a bunch of people, not necessarily in recovery. It was just people that were seeking God and growing for faith, and it was my accountability. People that would hold me accountable. Well, fast forward to my 1 year sober birthday, I guess if you want to call it. It was a week before Easter, and I had a party where I had an open bar tab at the tavern I grew up at in Illinois, Southern Illinois, Belleville, called Fridays. I've talked about it often on the show. It was my old church, if you want to call it that. Still a great place. Can't wait till they reopen. Praying for those guys who have had to shut the business down during this Corona stuff. So I had a party. It was my way of giving back to all the people that I had probably pissed off in my drunk ass ways, and so I bought pizza and drinks, and I think and I had to run to farmer's market to pick some vegetables up for the tavern to make the salad. And I walk in with this box of like green peppers, and there's Matt sitting sitting at a bar table in this pub, typing away at a laptop, which I find out later is his Easter sermon for the week, the sermon in a week or two. And I'll never forget that day. I have pictures, and I remember you talked about it on the stage at Easter. I believe we were still at Powell Symphony Hall, and you were like, "I was just at a Easter party. Here's this guy who's 1 year sober introducing me to guys he got in fights with." Like, it was, and the reason I bring that up because your message that Sunday was the power of the resurrection of Jesus and what it can symbolize in your own life. And I wanted you to talk, as I ramble and get long-winded here, about, it's not just me that you've seen, what the power of the story of Easter can do for people as we're entering Holy Week.
Yeah. Well, I'll say just a couple things to your listeners. One is kind of where you started by reading that note that I sent you. And I think that note, thank you for reading it. It makes me tear up a little bit thinking back on it. Because, when I wrote it, and I think people will resonate with this, you had every reason to screw up your life. Like, if you needed a justification to tell yourself about why you were drinking too much, doing stupid things, you could always go back to the death of your dad, right? You had that was kind of your card to play. If, as you don't understand what I've been through, and this is my reason. And I think a lot of people who are listening right now, and maybe who are struggling with addiction, we always have those reasons, right? Nobody understands the kind of hurt that we're experiencing and the kind of pain. There's always something there, and it drives a certain kind of justification for the lives we're living. But the end game of that is always the same. The enemy, if you believe in a spiritual enemy, just uses all that to drag us further down. I mean, the road to redemption, to coming back, to overcoming to victory is never through the next drink or the next hit or whatever. It's only meant to drag us down. And so what I always tell people is, man, I am not at all downplaying your pain or the reason that you have to do what you do. I think there's probably really good justifications out there, but it will not land your life. It'll land your life in the tomb. I mean, that's where it ends always. you can also use that hurt and that pain in your life for something different. The religious word we use is it can be redemptive. The resurrection of Jesus was literally the defeat of death, and to bring out of death, out of darkness, out of a tomb, something new, something hopeful, something living. And God right now can reach into, a lot of people listening feel like their life has already been decided, that their story is what it is. All the pain you can't undo, all the crap they've done, and where they are right now. But that all actually can be the most powerful part of your story if you turn it over to God and let God do something new with it, let God resurrect it, let God redeem it, that is, buy it back and turn it into something. We've seen that in your life. Now your story, all that, all the ways in which you screwed up, all the pain that you've been through, the death of your father, these are things that God now is using in a way that's hopeful, in a way that offers life to other people. It's not death dealing. And that's what God can do with the life of every single person who's listening. If you just give up that path that says, I have an excuse to do this, you don't understand, I'm going to do it anyway, this is what I want to do, I get all that. But if you hand that over and let God do something different with the pain, we're not denying it, let God do something different with it, it can actually be your strongest attribute and the most hopeful thing you have to offer the world. And I think that's the power of Easter. It's that not just that Jesus was resurrected from the dead, which I believe he was, but that Jesus resurrects us from the dead. Dead parts of our life,
Goosebumps.
things that we thought were in the grave and over, stuff that we thought we'd never want to revisit because it's embarrassing, shameful, tragic, harmful. Like, Jesus is able to take all this stuff and say, no, this is who you are, but watch, not only can I heal you, but I can help you to use this stuff to actually offer life to other people. And man, that is such a powerful thing for some of the people listening right now. Every stupid thing you've done and every horrible thing that somebody's done to you, every bad decision you've made and every time that you wish you could do it over, all that, you don't have to hide from it anymore. You don't have to keep it in the closet or anything. You can actually kind of put that out there and sit on a stage with 3,000 people listening and share it with them, because God is able to do this kind of stuff. God can take that stuff and actually use it to offer encouragement in life. So I get passionate about Easter, not because it's a story that happened 2,000 years ago where Jesus rose from the dead. I get passionate about it because Jesus can do that in our lives, can raise dead things and bring them to life. And so that was a sermon. I didn't mean to do that. I know I'm a preacher, so
no, you're good. Please.
But I get excited about it because if there are people listening that feel like their life has been decided, it hasn't. There's a chapter that hasn't been written yet, and they get to decide what that chapter is. And I don't care how deep down you are, how old you are, how many decades of mistakes you think you've made. There's a new chapter. There's another chapter. And God can start writing it, today. So that's what excites me.
I can only imagine being in your position. How long have you been at the gathering? When did you start the gathering? Tell our listeners.
I started the gathering about 13 and a half years ago.
So in those 13 and a half years, you've often shared this with church. It started with a group of a small group of people in your basement.
Yeah.
And now we're this year. Where you tell Easter used to do? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we were gonna do. It did started with just a small group hanging out in my living room. This year we're gonna do Easter in a new place. We were gonna do it at Chaffetz Arena over at St. Louis University. Obviously, that's not going to happen because of coronavirus. But we're still going to do Easter. It's just all going to be online. And while it's not the same, I'd love to see everybody in person. The cool thing about Easter this year is you can invite anybody, anywhere, wherever they live, however able they are to get out or have to stay in. And so I have a suspicion this may be our biggest Easter ever because we're still going to do it. And I think a lot of people right now feel like they're living in kind of a dark place.
Absolutely.
Whether it's because of coronavirus and everything, the anxiety about jobs and money and health, or just coronavirus aside, people living in darkness because of addiction or stress or anxiety or trauma or hurt. I mean, any of that kind of stuff. I think there's so many of us that are kind of in a dark place right now, and we need Easter more than ever. That idea that God doesn't wait till all that's over, but God is at work right now in the dark. You can't see it, but God's at work right now to start writing a new chapter for us. I think we need that message now more than ever. So we'll be doing it. It's just all going to be online now.
Yeah, we'll definitely, with the show notes and stuff, show you guys how to participate and jump on Sunday morning. And especially, Matt, for the lonely, the lonely fucking people out there, brother, that are maybe in this isolation alone by themselves, and they battled that before. They were struggling with loneliness before this, and now it's kind of reared its real ugly head. Those folks too, which is usually where a lot of us that are, I was lonely when I was living out of a whiskey bottle because I missed someone. It doesn't necessarily look like you not having anybody in your life. It could just be a state of mind, and I know people are out there having it. And then there's people that literally, who maybe there's a smaller family that's passed away, or they're single and sitting at home, and it's just them, and it's a brutal reality. So tune in and.
Hey Chris, can I say one more thing? Because
as much as you want, brother.
I'm just mindful as I'm talking. You started out the podcast by saying something about there's people that that have died because of addiction. And someone recently, I think you said,
2 people.
Died by suicide, maybe even.
Yeah.
And I've had friends as well, as you know. Someone as recently as just this winter, in February, did a funeral for a young man in our church, lived in Illinois, who OD'd. And I want to say something really quickly, because I think as I talk about this, there may be some people and some family members listening who said, but that wasn't true for my daughter or my son. They didn't come back. There wasn't a new chapter. They died, or they OD'd, or they took they took their own life. And I think there's some people who might be saying, it sounds good, that hope, that new day for some people, but it wasn't true for my loved one. And I just want to say something to that, because when we talk about Easter, it's not just a thing that happens in this life. I mean, ultimately what we believe is that God's power is more powerful than anything on earth that tries to take us down. And oftentimes in this life, through Jesus, we're able to begin living a new life right now. Mm-hmm. You're an example of that. Mm-hmm. You were saved, and literally, I mean saved. I'm not talking like religious BS. I mean literally saved. Literally. And you started living new life right now. There are some people that don't get to start that new life until after they die, because the struggle of addiction, the demon of addiction, or of stress or trauma or anxiety or depression or mental health or illness, they don't ever quite overcome it in this life. But the power of the resurrection is that we believe that God has the power to break those chains. And if they don't get to experience that new life here, they get to experience it for eternity after death. And so I just want to say, one of the mistakes and one of my biggest concerns is that people think that because their loved one didn't beat it, or didn't overcome depression, or didn't beat the addiction in this life, that somehow they're doomed in the next. And God, the power of the resurrection is also that Christ takes all of us who will die and is able to give us a life on the other side of death. And so I just want to say that if your loved one was not able to overcome it in this life, then we rejoice. I'll use a religious word there, that they're finally free from that. They're free from the depression or free from the addiction, or free to be who God created them to be in the life after. And so that's a hope that we hold on to. And I just want to share it with all those who might be listening, saying, well, what about the person that I love who didn't get to experience it here?
I'm glad you addressed that. That's often people. Yeah, I mean, that's what about my son? What about my daughter? You know, and we're grieving with you. There's no question about it. And the story is, sorry, I'm a little choked up. That story and promise that will be again is what keeps me going. To get, I mean, to be back with Tommy P, you know, my old man TP, like, and he wasn't just a dad. We all lose our grandparents and our parents, and there was the means that he passed away were pretty brutal, and I was maybe unhealthily and unwisely had all my eggs placed in his basket. So that's it. The grief hurt, and I'm not downplaying anybody else's grief or overplaying my own. It's just I was one of those people. What about my fatherhood, you know? And I'm driven knowing, and I often smiling that we'll be together again, and he's happy and holy and somewhat holy. I know he's happy. We work in the room up in heaven, and I know that for those that have lost their loved ones, so are they. And you're right. It's going to happen more, I think, unfortunately, during this epidemic, which is why Jeff and I are at the top of a hill, like trying to scream like that. You're able. There's a way if you want to try it before things get really dark, and bringing up the years you've been doing this, right? The 13 and a half at least at the gathering, and prior to that you were a pastor at a different church, right?
I was. Yeah.
You've seen probably countless stories of, like when you were preaching the good news of Easter, right? And people sometimes hear that they'll go to church once a year, it's on Easter, and they probably hear that a lot. They hear the good news of Easter probably from a lot of different pastors, but what I love about your message is you always put it, you put a face and a name to that story, to the Easter story every year, or faces and names, to where it's not just bullshit. You've seen it countless times, both I'm sure been the tragic times and funerals you've had to minister over, and the families you've had to pastor over while they're in their darkest grief. But you've also seen the power of the resurrection in someone's life, mine and countless others, I imagine, and your ministry or years of doing this. So it's not just Bible study, like take the test and answer the Easter. What is Easter about? Like, this is real life, real people, and you've seen it, and that's why you come back and keep screaming it, I imagine, and it's. You've seen it a ton.
Yeah, I have in all sorts of ways, large and small, and people don't have to have been, doing awful things and then get, and then have a huge conversion. That happens, and that's awesome. We celebrate that. But there's also all sorts of small ways. People who've been living for the wrong kinds of things. People put too much of their hope in money or in success or in the square footage of their house or in what their family, having the perfect family, and have figured out that in some ways all those things are mini addictions, right? We're looking for ultimate meaning in something that can never provide it. I see the way in which they change, and God does so much more with their life than they ever thought God could or would. And it's cool every time I see it. And so I love preaching it. There's a little story that Jesus tells about, it's a parable of, a farmer who goes out and, throws seed on the ground. And some of the seed falls on the rocks, he says. Some falls on the hard path it can't penetrate. Some goes among the weeds and it gets choked out. But some goes in good soil and it actually grows. And I kind of see myself similar on Easter. Like I put it out there year after year. And some people are in a place where, it's just a hard heart, and they're not listening, man. Someone drug them there to church and they don't want to be there.
I was there. The pageant.
And some like they want to receive it, they do, but there's just so much stuff going on in their life that pretty quickly life goes right back to normal. And there are some people that hear it, like the seed that falls in the rocks, and enthusiastically they're all in, and then it kind of fizzles away because they don't really ever grow roots with it. But every year there are some people that are ready, where the soil of their heart is ready for something new to be planted there. And when the message hits your life at a time when you're ready, that's when really cool things happen. And so I always say at Easter, it's partly me sharing the message, but it's also partly each of you deciding, what's the state of my heart this year? Am I ready for something new and different in my life? Or am I still maintaining my old defenses and justification? And so is there like a readiness in you? What kind of soil are you? And when those two things meet, when you're ready, when there's a readiness and an openness at least, and then the message hits, that's when really cool things can happen. And that's not me or you. That's obviously and ultimately God. But I always tell people, how you show up this Easter also matters. So a question each person can kind of ask themselves as they're sitting here, wherever they are in life, is kind of, am I ready for something different? Have I tried it my way long enough? Or have I tried to do my thing long enough? Am I ready maybe for something different? Is there a readiness? And that's when Easter can be the most powerful.
I can attest to that, and and we'll wrap up here shortly, but I know you got a casserole or something in the oven you mentioned, but I was at Easter a couple years, living a different life, even with my father before he tragically passed away. We would go, and great message, and let's get home to the ham and the potato salad, and a couple cocktails, and you have reason to have a fun Sunday, right? And being around some of my family, you got to have a couple cocktails, but but it's an excuse for everyone probably. But there was the year that I was newly sober, that first Easter, like 2 weeks maybe, and that's your like cradle 'em like an egg thing, right? And the Easter message stuck to me that year, and now I'm 6 years sober. I met my wife in your church, proposed to her on the steps of the church site that we go to. Have lifelong friends, from a 70-plus-year-old woman down to kids that help in the kid ministry. Your kids have been family to us. I still trying to figure out how to sabotage this whole pastor going to Kansas City thing, but we'll figure that out off air, off topic. That's been a tough pill to swallow because we love Evie to death. But like the things that have happened to me, because I was ready for those seeds to grow. And I'm sure Jeff could attest to this too. He isn't, he's Mr. Talkie today, but and he's not wearing his Pond Offs Anonymous hat. So if I paid him, I'd fine him. But he's not gonna, right? My life's been transformed by letting that grow, because I tried it my way, and my way almost killed me. And to just sit here and like reflect on that, which isn't probably good podcasting, because it's just me and thought. Like, it's just crazy to think about. It's absolutely crazy to think about that. Like, even looking back at my wife's trajectory from LA to land into your church, because you had a welcoming church, like, and it's unbelievable. And I'll close my long-winded ramble with, and I shared this on our mutual friend Laura Susik's show. Praying for her right now. She's going through some rough times. But I shared with her that, and I got this really, I mean, from your messages and my life, that the way through Jesus, like the impossible is possible, which isn't that the story of Easter? And that there's a lot of people right now thinking that it's impossible for them to change. And it's not. And I'm telling you that from the loudest I can scream it, with as many fucking swear words as I can say. That is bullshit, and I'm a living proof of it. And with Jesus, the impossible is possible.
Yeah. Well, amen to that. And I really appreciate you having me on. I just want to tell people that are listening, and you are stronger than you think you are. I think one of the things addiction can do to you is make you think that you can't, and you can, not by yourself, but you can. I think addiction makes you think it's over when it's not. There's something new. I think addiction makes you think it's impossible when indeed it's possible. So I love that as a place to leave it. And, I love you, and I still think there's so much more that God's going to continue to do with you. I've always told you that.
Right.
And I think the podcast is proof that there's more and more and more that God's got in store for you. So don't ever underestimate, what God can do with your story, because God can do, as Paul says, far greater than anything we can ask for or imagine. And so I love you, man. I'm glad that you had me on, and keep doing what you're doing, curse words and all. Just be thoughtful.
Thanks, man. Hey, I appreciate it, and this has been great. So thanks for coming on. It's been our pleasure. Have you guys been hearing how people have been hacking into Zoom?
Yes.
And, flashing porn up, and that would be the worst episode, right? That our Zoom with our pastor got on, and somebody started flashing dirty pictures or drawing genitalia on it. So we avoided that. That's a win. I guess Zoom needs to work on their security measures from what I read, but so far unaffected. But
That's right.
I would like to close, Matt, if you don't mind, with can you pray for our listeners, for our audience, the people that are listening to this, that because a lot of them either is struggling or know somebody that is, and we all could use as many prayers as we can get.
You bet. Let's pray. Holy God, first we give you thanks that when we can't, you can. When we don't, you do. When we're in darkness, you lead us to light. When we are in death, you come with life, and that you are more powerful than anything that we wrestle with in this life. And that was made real when Jesus conquered the greatest enemy of all, which was death. And if Jesus can conquer death, then Jesus can do anything in our life. And God, my prayer is that wherever we are right now, as we're listening to this, that we may believe that we may believe that whatever hole we feel like we're in, whatever rock bottom we maybe feel like we are experiencing, however dark it may seem, that you are not somewhere else, but you're right here with us. And you are doing a work right now, even though we can't see it. And my prayer is that your Spirit would just give us enough trust to maybe hold on to that and to begin to reach out towards you, to trust that the life that you call us to live is going to be better than the one that we're trying to make for ourselves. And so, God, that's my prayer, is that we would lean a little more on you and a little less on us. And that because of that, you would lead us towards life, a life here and that life to come. We pray these things in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Matt. I love you. Have a great day, brother. We'll see you tomorrow, and we'll see all you guys at Easter. Tune in. We'll put all the links on the show notes, and it's called The Gathering now in St. Louis, or The Gathering. Jeff, what's the website?
if they can go to gatheringnow.org. So gatheringnow.org will have worship live on Easter and every Sunday. They can also go find us on Facebook, Gathering Now on Facebook. It'll run as Facebook Live, worship, and YouTube, right, Jeff? People can
It's
go
on
to
YouTube
as well. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Well, it can still be a rejoiceful time. Please know that, and please believe that. And Matt, thanks again.
yep. Thanks, guys.
I'm not going to say let us pray, because that's how you pray, right there. See you guys.
If you're struggling or know someone that is, please have them check out our podcast and reach out to Chris or me. We want to listen, and we're super eager to help. Pondoff's Anonymous is Chris Pondoff and produced by me, Jeff Allen. Our music is Anti-Hero by McCall and Gentle Waters by Wild Wonder. For more information, visit pondoffsanonymous.com. Find us on Facebook and Instagram.